Hey guys, Magnet back here with yet another Legacy of the Void multiplayer update pushed down from Blizzard just a few hours ago. Some pretty big changes in here that I'm going to be going over, and as you can see on the screen, there's going to be some information about resources, slower battles that they're considering. Terran Unit was removed, Protos Unit was added, and a Zerg upgrade was removed. So a lot of pretty big changes that are going to affect the game quite a bit. And I'll kind of break these down for you and offer a little bit of analysis on how it's going to change the game and what to look forward to. So let's take a look at the first one here, which is the resource update. And I hesitate to call this an update because they're basically just affirming that their resource changes are going to be solid until beta. And I'm assuming that that also means that the 12 starting workers is also going to be something solid. So not too big of a change here, but I guess it is some level of assurance knowing that they're pretty confident with their resource updates and pushing them through to the next phase of testing. So I guess look out for that in the beta. This was a weird one though, and this was not something I was really expecting them to start looking at because people have been complaining about this for a little while. And by complaining, I typically mean people that are really Brood War purists will go back and say that the biggest difference between Brood War and StarCraft 2 is that the battles are a lot slower in Brood War, and it made for a lot more of attention being paid to micro. So they were kind of considering stuff like this, and they were putting it into StarCraft 2, and they did that by experimenting with 40% slower attack speeds on all the units. And they basically went on to say that they were expecting really big balance problems with this, but it actually didn't present a lot of problems. They felt that it just made the game a lot less about skill and stuff, which is such a great way for me to describe it, skill and stuff. I don't know how I feel about this. I feel like they're really discounting something that could have changed the game quite a bit and maybe improved the game quite a bit. But I don't know if they're going to wind up going through with it just because they don't really see the point right now. I think they're just being open and saying that they are challenging pretty much all of their ideas, and they're challenging the entirety of StarCraft 2 as a whole by making such a dramatic change and rolling with it and see if they can do anything with it. But I'm almost thinking that they're going to go a little further with this and see what they can make out of it. I think they're going to wait to see what the community reaction is to the fact that they're testing it, and if they get overwhelming positivity, I think they'll stick with it. But if nobody seems to care, then I think they're just going to say screw it and drop it. So this was a weird one, but definitely letting you know that they're looking at basically all aspects of the game and thinking about changing pretty much everything. So that was interesting. The next one, this is a pretty big one, and that is that yes, the Herk has been removed as of now. They basically just said that it didn't work out the way that they wanted it to. And I felt from the beginning that both the Herk and the Cyclone were kind of redundant units. I was a little more excited for the Herk than the Cyclone just because it would change Ling Bane fights a little bit. But I like the direction they're going instead with it. And the one that they mentioned, and this isn't final by any means, is that they're thinking of having a unit out on the battlefield that can kind of create, I guess, items on the battlefield or like attacking buildings or something like that. It wasn't totally clear how that was going to work, but I'm imagining they're trying to look at a way for Terran to kind of fortify their position a little bit more and going with a unit design kind of like this. Honestly, I would have preferred to see the Cyclone removed and having it repurposed to more of like a combat item in the battlefield type of unit that they're talking about, because the Cyclone is even more redundant than the Herk was in pretty much every way. So I think this was a little bit strange. I'd like to see those two flopped, but for the most part I didn't really see much of a purpose of having either one of them. But I don't know. They're in kind of a weird place with a lot of the Terran units, but the fact that they're willing to just axe this one and start completely over is kind of a weird choice, but I guess you have to respect it. So the next one's the Thor Change, and like we talked about all along with the Thor Change with the whole auto repair ability, I just didn't see much of a reason not to use it, and that's exactly what they said in their update as well. They just basically said that if your Thor was low on health, why would you ever not hit that button? And it's not really that interesting because it's not like Thors by themselves ever compose an army. So I still don't know what they're going to do with this, and they're kind of running out of time and out of options as far as making this an interesting unit, so I really don't know where it's going to go. But I guess all things considered, it's basically back to where it was at the end of Heart of the Swarm, so nothing too interesting having been changed. The next one that they mentioned is a range adjustment on the scan from the orbital command, and they were really vague on this one. All they said is just that they were playing around with the scan range, trying to make it a little bit more about specific unit control when a scan goes off. I have no idea what that means, and what I guess it means is that the scan range is going to be shorter, meaning that you'll have to be more precise with your scan locations. In particular, looking for things like burrowed banelings won't be as automatic if you're going to catch them every single time, and it'll be more expensive to use, I think. I don't know why the scan range would be larger, if that has anything to do with unit control. And plus, if the scan ranges were shorter, then you'd see a lot more players encouraged to use things like DTs, or maybe Banshees that could get outside of the scan range in time. So, I have no idea what they meant by what they said on this, but I have to only assume that this means a shorter range on scans. And this really isn't anything official, it just kind of seems like they're playing around with the idea of this one. So, and one other thing I should mention is that all these changes seem to be at a different point in their lifespan. Like some of them they're basically saying, yeah, we're going with it 100%, and other ones just seem like they're just barely thinking of this and just barely starting to test it. So, it's not like all these changes are at the same level. Alright, the new Protos Unit. We've been talking about this a lot, wondering what it's going to do. And what they've come up with is that they want to have a unit that can be used throughout the game, rather than just one point of the game. It's supposedly going to have a ground-only attack. It's going to be ranged, so kind of like a Marauder, I would think. Probably not the whole, like, big damage against armored, I would suspect. They're expecting standard movement speed, as they called it, which, to me, standard typically means like Zealot speed or Sentry speed, something like that. Fairly slow, but not overwhelming. Probably slower than a Stalker for sure. And the ability that they're going to have on it is called the Shade, or something to that effect. It's really weird the way they described it, but basically, as far as I gathered, it would send out a copy of the unit that would do nothing. It would just, like, walk around, it couldn't attack or be attacked, and then it would return back to the source. So, it seems like a hallucination that can't do anything, it can't hinder anything, can't take any damage, so I don't know what the point of that is. I guess they weren't really clear on whether you could control it yourself or not, and I'm just going to look it up here really fast just to double check to make sure I didn't miss anything. It says the Shade can independently move around but cannot attack or be attacked. So independently move around, I don't know if that means that it moves on its own or if that means that the player can move it around. So I would guess that the player can move it around, but their wording is really strange. Either way, I think this is supposed to be a unit that gets out on the map early, that can do a little bit of damage, and it seems to have a little bit of a confusing element to it, so that the other player can't really tell which one they're supposed to be worried about. But then at the same time, like, if you can't attack these copies, then the best thing it's going to do is make people worry for a couple seconds and then realize that they're not anything to be worried about. Because it's not like if you were on an attack move, it would accidentally attack the wrong one. So if both of them are right next to each other, you just attack the real one anyway. So I don't know if I really get that. I have to just wait and see until that one's implemented. Alright, the Immortal Change. We've been talking a lot about how the Immortals and Warp Prisms are very overpowered. And what their last change was that the barrier on there that could be activated was a researchable ability. And I was saying that there's really no way that's going to stick around, because that would make Immortals in the early game almost entirely useless if they basically have no Hardened Shield and no barrier ability until you get a Robobay out. At that point it's like, why wouldn't you just get Colossus anyway? So they took that off. But they also reduced the amount of absorbed damage from 200 to 100, which again, like, I don't see how that really helps out too much in the early game, especially against things like Blinkstalker attacks. Because an extra 100 health effectively is like, that's an extra volley for the Stalkers at best, which is not that big of a deal. And an extra volley for the Stalkers is almost what it was for the Hardened Shield, so I guess that helps out a little bit, but I guess I don't really know what to think. It'll make Stalker Immortal fights a lot weirder as well. It just seems like they don't know what to do with this yet, and I still maintain that the core problem is the Warp Prism, and it seems like they're really trying to find ways to work around that core problem, because they really want the Warp Prism to stick around. And frankly, I kind of want the Warp Prism to stick around too, because I think it's a really cool idea, but not if it has a bunch of overpowered stuff like this. So, I don't really know what to say about this right now. I guess it's a little bit better in the sense of... I don't know. I'd have to just wait and see. I don't even know what to say about this. That's it. The end. Tempest Change / Revert. So, if you guys weren't familiar with how the Tempests were before, I mentioned this a lot in my last update video. And that is that their previous iteration of the Tempest was crazy. The speed on it was crazy. They were so fast that you could actually kite Hydras that were on creep and had speed upgrades. Which means that if Zerg did anything other than go Spire, then that would mean that the Tempest could control the whole map for basically as long as they wanted to. And that was insane. So they didn't seem to really like that whole idea. They said they were more inclined to favor the Heart of the Swarm design, which I find a little bit disappointing. But they also say they don't want it to counter massive units, so they're thinking of still keeping the ability on there, which from my experience, the ability was pretty useless to begin with. But they still seem like they want it to hit ground and air and move slowly, like it did back in Heart of the Swarm. So, I don't know. I'm actually a little bit disappointed in that as well. I kind of liked the new Tempest, and I wanted to see where they would go. But they seemed to not like it, so they went ahead and got rid of it. So this was also another weird one. They listed up saying that the Infestor ability versus mass amounts of air units has been moved to the Viper. But as far as I knew, from their last update, it was on the Viper anyway. So now they're saying that it was put on Infestors for the time being, and then now they're moving it back to Vipers. So this one I read, and I'm like, so basically there's no change from the last update. And they apparently had been testing it on Infestors and saying that that was too strong without anybody else really knowing too much. Maybe they mentioned it in some like obscure post somewhere that I never saw, but anyway, that was weird. And I believe this is the last one, and this is regarding Roach changes. Basically straight up saying that rather than having to research Tunneling Claws, it just comes when you get Burrow. So kind of the same way that Infestors can move around when they're burrowed, once you research Burrow, Roaches can kind of do the same thing, which is a completely crazy change. And it further strengthens the Zerg race versus Protoss, in the sense that Protoss is still running out of even more options with all the new stuff that Zerg is getting and all the new, or rather not new, things that Protoss is getting as they continue to get reverted and having things removed from them. So this is interesting in a lot of ways. Particularly, I think this is going to be interesting against Terran. And Zerg versus Zerg is going to be just chaos, unless you start getting a lot of detection and maybe lurkers sitting around to start to deflect these. I think with default Tunneling Claws and the Roach regen rate underground, that's going to be insanely strong. But I've been thinking for a long time that individual Roach micro has never been a thing, and I wonder if that's where they want to go with this. In the way that you can individually micro Blink Stalkers, for example. If you could burrow a Roach, send it to the back, and have it unburrow once it got back there. I've always been wondering if they were going to try and make that a thing, because I think that's a really cool idea. And it seems like they're trying to push that even harder, but I almost wonder if this will just be used for even more kind of gimmicky harassment type of plays. Not necessarily gimmicky, I guess, but not a super solid play in the sense that if they just sit there with detection, then they'll hold it off all day long and you'll just lose Roaches. So, I don't know. These are weird changes. Overall, I have to say that I have a fairly kind of a salty taste in my mouth about these updates. The one I really like is the fact that they're trying to redesign the Herk and kind of make it more of a battle presence type of unit, but overall, I can't say these were that interesting of changes, unfortunately. The new Protos unit sounds weird, the Zerg upgrades are weird, kind of just a weird update overall, but we're getting closer to the beta being released, and there's not a solid date on that. But now they're starting to basically, for the first time, just say, yes, this is going to be solid up until beta, which means it's got to be coming pretty soon. So I guess look out for that in the future, and as soon as beta pops up, I'll definitely start putting some gameplay videos up for you guys, considering I should be on one of the first lists for it since I do have BlizzCon access. So anyway, if you have any questions or anything, or any comments, definitely leave them down below. I will always post new videos whenever they post new multiplayer changes or updates, whether it's to Heart of the Swarm or Legacy of the Void at this point. So stick around and subscribe if you want to see more of this in the future. But yeah, thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys real soon.